Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We have over 1,500 people registered. We really appreciate you joining us. This is an extraordinary turnout. My name is Brad Crabtree. I'm Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy and Carbon Management here at the Department of Energy. Given the central importance of carbon management to meeting the goal of reaching net zero emissions by 2050, it's only appropriate that we recognize Carbon Management Day. In fact, this is our second annual Carbon Management Day. We celebrated on December 1st because 1201 is the atomic mass of the carbon atom. When President Biden announced the goal of reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions economy-wide by mid-century at the beginning of this administration, he set a very high bar. And candidly, until recently, we lacked the federal policy support sufficient to put our economy on track to meet such a target. Fortunately, a lot has changed in the past 12 months. Thanks to provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure law passed last year and the Inflation Reduction Act signed in August, we have transformed our potential and capacity for climate action. And equally importantly, we have transformed our capacities to support domestic energy security, industrial production and manufacturing, retain and create high-wage jobs, and provide economic and environmental benefits to communities across our nation, all while we decarbonize our economy. The bipartisan infrastructure law provides $62 billion to the Department of Energy over 5 years for energy and climate-related investments. And thanks to the bipartisan 2020 Energy Act, the funding in the infrastructure bill comes with an expanded focus, not just on traditional research and development, but also major federal investments in commercial scale demonstration and deployment of climate essential technologies and infrastructure. More than $12 billion of that $62 billion is allocated specifically for carbon management projects. And that number exceeds $20 billion if you add clean hydrogen investments, some of which involve carbon management. Here are some highlights of what's included. $2.5 billion for deployment of at least 6 commercial scale carbon capture demonstration projects. That includes 2 for industrial facilities, 2 for natural gas power plants, and 2 for coal-fired power generation. There's $3.5 billion that will be dedicated to capturing and storing carbon directly from the air, with DOE supporting the development of 4 regional direct air capture hubs, each capable of capturing and removing at least 1 million tons of CO2 annually from the atmosphere. This will be the largest investment in direct air capture by any government in the world, and the first to focus on truly large-scale commercial deployment of the technology. $8 billion will go to 4 or more regional hubs to demonstrate commercial scale production, transport, storage, and commercial end uses of clean hydrogen. At least one will prioritize hydrogen production from natural gas coupled with carbon capture and storage. And there's nothing piecemeal about this effort. We are building out regional networks for CO2 transport and storage to provide the shared infrastructure that's needed to support carbon and hydrogen hubs and achieve economies of scale at the regional level. This will allow multiple facilities and industries to participate in capturing, transporting, and storing carbon, ultimately at the gigaton scale necessary to tackle our climate challenge. Toward that end, $2.5 billion is available to support the feasibility, siting, permitting, and construction of regional geologic storage sites, 20 to 40 facilities in all, we estimate, each of which must be capable of receiving a minimum of 50 million tons of CO2 over 30 years, and many of these sites will store much more. And complementing this expansive storage program will be what we call CIFIA, the Carbon Dioxide Transportation Infrastructure Refinance and Innovation Authority. $2.1 billion for CIFIA will be used by our Department of Energy loan program to leverage what will be much greater sums of private capital to help jumpstart financing the CO2 transport infrastructure that we need to knit together future carbon capture and direct air capture projects with many geologic storage sites region by region. And to top it all off, the recently enacted Inflation Reduction Act dramatically expands the 45Q tax credit in a way that supercharges these provisions in the infrastructure bill. There are many things in the IRA, but the tax credit, the tax credit for 45Q is particularly important for carbon management. It's been increased to $85 for every metric ton of CO2 emissions captured and permanently stored from industrial and of facilities and electric power generation, and up to $180 per ton for CO2 captured from future direct air capture plants. In addition, the 45Q incentive will be available to any carbon capture, carbon conversion, or direct air capture project beginning construction within the next 10 years. And the credit will be made available as direct payments during the first 5 years of commercial operation of these projects, which will facilitate private sector financing. These improvements to 45Q will leverage private investments in projects supported by DOE infrastructure dollars. Even more importantly, the revamped 45Q incentive will enable dozens and perhaps hundreds of additional projects to move forward in the commercial marketplace with little or no federal funding. In short, we are at an extraordinary moment. Each of these bills on their own would qualify as the most significant U.S. energy and climate legislation to date. But taken together, some have compared this level of federal support for energy and climate to U.S. leadership and investments of a much earlier era, such as NASA's Apollo program or the interstate highway system. By our estimates, these two pieces of legislation help set our nation on a path to roughly 40% reduction in emissions from 2005 levels by 2030, less than 8 years from today. In terms of its carbon management potential, the Rhodium Group estimates that the combination of infrastructure bill investments coupled with the enhanced 45Q tax credit could result in 215 to 250 million metric tons of additional annual CO2 capture and storage capacity by 2035. But this is about more than policy and technology. It is also about community and stakeholder support. If we are to meet these ambitious climate goals, we will have to deploy technology and infrastructure on an unprecedented scale. Not just carbon capture projects and CO2 storage sites, but also solar projects, wind farms, and electric transmission lines. This level of deployment will require broad community participation and support and project development that delivers demonstrable local economic, environmental, and other benefits to citizens, especially citizens in disadvantaged communities that have long borne a burden of diminished economic opportunity and disproportionate levels of pollution. That's why we are working to transform how we do our work in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management to put local communities and stakeholders at the center of our efforts to help ensure project success. As you will hear later from my colleague Holly Buck, we have prepared comprehensive guidance that addresses how we expect applicants for DOE funding to incorporate community engagement, workplace standards and workforce development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and Justice 40 commitments. Now it's time to turn to the rest of our program. We will start with my colleague Jen Wilcox, who is Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. She is a leading expert in the field and a driving force for much of our work at FECM. Jen will provide an overview of our mission, vision, key priorities, and recent accomplishments. Jen will be followed by Holly Buck, who will highlight the new ground we are breaking on community and stakeholder engagement to ensure project success. Joining Holly will be Matt Antes, who will outline our engagement of governments and key stakeholders in an international context to advance our carbon management priorities globally. And then my colleague Mark Akevich will moderate a panel with two recipients of FECM funding, Dr. Raghavir Gupta, President of Sustian Technologies, and John Northington, Director of the National Carbon Capture Center. This will provide an opportunity to go more in depth and learn about their carbon management work. Finally, we will leave time for questions at the end. And now I'll turn it over to you, Jen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. And hey, everybody, thanks again for being here for our second annual Carbon Management Day. First, I want to discuss our mission in fossil energy and carbon management. Within FECM, we support and invest in research, development, demonstration, and deployment in critical technologies and infrastructure to reduce environmental and climate impacts of fossil fuel production and use, with the goal of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. So to learn a little bit more about this mission, in the next slide, I'll encourage you to take a look at our strategic vision, which we released in April. And our priorities focus on advancing carbon management approaches toward deep decarbonization, advancing technologies that lead to sustainable energy resources, all while advancing justice, labor, and engagement. And in the next slide, a year ago, you might recall that we launched our DOE-wide carbon negative shot, investing across all removal approaches to ultimately achieve cost reductions of less than $100 per net metric ton of CO2 equivalent. Included is also robust accounting of full life cycle accounting emissions, high quality durable storage, which also includes monitoring, reporting, and verification for all approaches, and then ultimately ensuring that these investments lead to carbon removal that can scale to the gigaton, which is going to be critical since this is a tool to help us achieve net zero. And carbon removal is really seen as a tool to counterbalance the truly hard to decarbonize sectors. Next, we've also been really busy at FECM in this last year, with total funding opportunities at $3.3 billion and already $346 million in project selections. We've also launched a new webpage, so I encourage you to take a look. It features a list of our current funding opportunities along with a carbon matchmaker tool. It serves as a one-stop shop for all potential funding opportunity announcements, requests for information, and notices of intent. Next. In addition, I encourage you to take a look at our updated webpage on solicitations and business opportunities. In fact, we have a couple of new requests for information or RFIs that are just out today. One is the implementation of future growth grants under the Carbon Dioxide Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Program, or the CIFIA program. Another is on the development of field labs at carbon storage facilities through the Carbon Storage Technology Operations and Research Initiative, also known as Carbon Store. So please take a look, and we encourage you to share the feedback if these RFIs fall within your areas of expertise. Finally, I want to call your attention to job opportunities at FECM. We're looking for enthusiastic, driven professionals to join our team. We have a lead role to play in the clean energy transition. And so if you or anybody that you know is interested in joining our team, please visit fecm.energy.gov and click on the services tab. We have a lot of opportunities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Dr. Holly Jean Buck and Matt Antes, to share our stakeholder engagement with you. Thanks again for being here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we've been up to at DOE this past year in terms of domestic engagement with carbon management. So we know that community engagement is critical to having high quality projects that minimize or avoid harms and deliver real benefits to communities. And here's 3 things that we're excited about. First, we've put societal considerations and impacts plans into our funding, meaning that applicants will have to address social dimensions to be awarded government support. Second, we've developed an engagement framework to help our own office and practice move towards meaningful two-way engagement, which research and communities have shown is really important. And third, we're piloting a series of place-based interactive workshops, which will help us develop new practices for engaging with communities on the ground. So next, I'm going to talk about these societal considerations and impacts plans, which are really driven by the need to respond to 4 big challenges. So first, we know that there's a lack of diversity in science, technology, engineering, mathematics fields, and this can lead to continued inequality as well as lost opportunities for workers and for companies. Second, the benefits, the harms, and the risks from innovation and industrial development are often unevenly distributed. Third, the public is often left out of decision-making on energy infrastructure. And we know that this can lessen trust between people who make decisions and experts and the public, which can inhibit deployment. And fourth, many communities are struggling with a lack of quality jobs that pay a family-sustaining wage. So it's kind of overwhelming. We have a lot of work to do. How are we going to address all of these things at once? Next slide, please. So these plans that our office, in coordination with the rest of DOE, is developing have 4 elements that respond to these 4 challenges: diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility plans, Justice 40 initiative plans, community labor and stakeholder engagement plans, and quality jobs. And so this package is scored in merit review, meaning that applicants really have to be detailed and robust in all of these areas to get a good score. And so what do we actually mean by robust? Next slide, please. Basically, we mean that we're not just talking the talk about these things and saying nice words about them. We really want to be taking action, and we want the projects that we support to be really leading the way and taking action here too, to set a model for the whole rest of the field, right? And so often we start with having a vision or doing some assessment of the data related to these challenges. Those are really important steps, but we want to support applicants in moving along this continuum to using that data, carrying out that vision to determine goals. So you know what's lacking, where to improve, and then set outcomes. So how can you measure when you've succeeded in reaching that? And finally, implementation. So this is really key to the framework. So who are the specific actors? What are the timeframes? What are the actions that are going to be taken? And so that's the societal consideration and impacts plans, which we invite reviewers for as well. You can find more information on our website. Next slide, please. So as well as thinking about how companies can engage, we're also thinking more broadly about our own role here in the government and at DOE and in our office specifically. And we've recently developed a framework to guide our activities in this space. And we really hope this will encourage a broader community of practice as well in terms of how to think about this. And we're excited to share this today. You can read about it on the FECM website. Basically, this is a high-level framework that sets out our vision for community, stakeholder, and tribal engagement, what our strategic focus areas are, and what our guiding principles are. And so these principles are simple but powerful. We want to support proactive and early engagement, meaning that engagement needs to happen while this engagement can influence the project. And it needs to happen before there are regulatory or permitting requirements. It's kind of taking the first step, taking that initiative. By place-based, we mean that there's no one-size-fits-all formula. Engagement needs to be tailored to the needs, context, and people in each place. By community-based knowledge, we mean that engagement isn't just about what happens within the physical footprint of a facility that's proposed. Really, we have these layers of engagement that involve producing knowledge, creating data, and there's also this broader need for engagement about climate and energy pathways and what trade-offs might be there between different sorts of energy systems. And so DOE has a lot of modeling and resources that can help people understand what technologies, what future trajectories are a fit for a particular region. So we're thinking about how we can do a better job of sharing that knowledge and those tools so communities can explore their own visions of their climate and energy futures. So this seems broader, it is, but it's also directly relevant to carbon management, because if you don't have a wider view of the energy transition, it's hard to understand why you might want carbon management infrastructure near you. And finally, by engagement that scales, we're thinking about how do we scale engagement at the same time as scaling the technology? What can we in the federal government do to help this broader group of project developers, as well as academics, nonprofits, local governments think about how to do engagement? So next, I want to take a bit of a deeper dive, next slide, please, into this first idea of two-way engagement and talk about what that looks like beyond a phrase. So it means moving beyond thinking of engagement about informing or educating and kind of a one-way transmission of information to having a dialogue, a relationship, not thinking about engagement with the goal of simply securing acceptance for a project, but really thinking about how to listen to ideas in order to make adaptations. And like I mentioned a minute ago, thinking about engagement beyond the physical infrastructure in one place, thinking about communities, both as geographic areas and broader groups that can be impacted, and also thinking about engagement that encompasses data, including community-based monitoring and community science. So next slide. Finally, thinking of all of this, ideas, what are we actually doing? Right now, we're working with other federal agencies to build our own capacity to put those principles into practice. So this fall, we've started with 5 interactive workshops, which have been allowing us to have in-depth conversations with communities and diverse stakeholder groups to hear about their priorities, concerns, and questions, which we can then use to inform our programs and engagement efforts. So That's a snapshot of what we're up to in terms of domestic engagement. And I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Matt, for a look at our international efforts.
Thank you, Holly. As you all know, scaling up carbon management technologies and approaches is a global challenge that requires concerted global actions. And so it makes sense that international engagement is one of the keys to the success of such efforts. FECM's strategic engagement team, of which I'm a part, facilitates global and domestic conversations related to carbon management. Dr. Holly Buck just provided an overview of some of the domestic activities that this team is focusing on. I'm going to tell you about some of the significant recent developments internationally. But first, let me start with some grounding on what we gain by working with our international partners. And I'll note just a few reasons. First, it enables more efficient use of resources and accelerates timelines for new innovations. So when FECM coordinates with governments and organizations globally, we can share pre-competitive work based on the respective expertise of each facility or institution in those areas. And we can avoid unnecessary duplication. So one example is sharing access to international carbon capture test facilities, like those in Norway, Australia, Korea, and Japan, just to name a few. Second, working with global partners facilitates knowledge transfer on the latest developments, what is working and what isn't in different contexts. This can drive down technology costs faster. As we've seen with other low carbon technologies, innovation and cost reductions in one country also help to significantly reduce the cost of deployment globally. Third, international partnerships help open avenues for foreign investments and access to markets for US companies. And ultimately, when it comes to long-lived greenhouse gases, emissions reductions and removals anywhere help everywhere. So anywhere in the globe, emissions reductions help across the globe. So we know that international engagement is mutually beneficial. But this moment we're in with recent legislation and support for carbon management, it's become even more of an opportunity for the US to lead global carbon management industry and show how it can be scaled up in a way that is socially and environmentally responsible. This gives us an opportunity to not just support implementing the projects, but collaborating with the global community and sharing what responsible deployment of carbon management technologies look like. So we're saying, here is a technology application at a US facility, and perhaps that experience or similar configurations could also be applied in another region, and vice versa. Or here's a model for engaging with communities and stakeholders that may provide useful in another context. This is broader than FECM or even the Department of Energy. It includes working with other government agencies, state, local, tribal governments, companies, nonprofits, communities. It's an opportunity to implement carbon management climate solutions in the right way. I'd like to share a few highlights of new collaborations and recent progress we've made by working with our international partners. Announced just 2 weeks ago, FECM is working with partner organizations and governments, including the government of Nigeria, to stand up a new Africa Center of Excellence for Carbon Management, Technology, and Innovation. This center, which is an actual physical facility, will help Africans across the continent, not just in Nigeria, help achieve climate goals through technology and infrastructure to manage carbon and methane emissions, while also working toward improved energy access and clean growth and development of Africa's economy. The center will serve as a resource for expertise in developing and deploying carbon management technologies across sectors: energy, industry, agriculture, marine. The center will also focus on developing the workforce necessary for deployment. Project plans for phase 1 of the center are already underway. Initial projects will focus on helping Africans create an enabling environment for carbon management. This includes activities such as legal and regulatory frameworks, stakeholder and community engagement, workforce development, and financing. Second is an important new collaboration with the global cement industry. As you know, point source capture of CO2 coupled with secure storage will play a key role in decarbonizing the industrial sector. particularly for industries like cement production that have non-energy CO2 emissions, process emissions. That's why this initiative on decarbonizing cement is a real difference maker. FECM is partnering with governments and major cement companies to join a global public-private commitment to scale up carbon capture, utilization, and storage in the cement sector. Through this effort, partners have a platform and agreement in place to collaborate on technical, economic, and social dimensions of early cement CCUS projects to show how the field can develop rapidly, effectively, and responsibly. Third is a major new international effort on carbon dioxide removal. So taking CO2 that's already been released in the air and using innovative approaches to take it out of the air and durably store it. The Carbon Dioxide Removal Launchpad was announced at the United Nations Climate Conference, COP27, just 2 weeks ago by Secretary Granholm, along with other ministers and senior level officials from partner countries. It's a coalition spearheaded by FECM and 6 governments and counting, who have each committed to build a demonstration scale carbon dioxide removal project by 2025, share learnings from these demonstrations, and invest cumulatively at least $100 million in carbon dioxide removal projects. It leverages the multi-country partnerships of Mission Innovation, which is an action-oriented global clean energy initiative to drive down costs and accelerate progress toward net zero goals. This Launchpad effort really exemplifies the benefits of collaborating internationally. It encourages investments across a diversity of geographies for getting those first few carbon dioxide removal projects built beyond lab scale testing in different regions, under different operating conditions, in different policy regimes with different business models. And it encourages sharing what is learned from those projects, which will then accelerate improvements. As part of this initiative, Launchpad countries are also agreeing to collaborate on developing robust measurement, reporting, and verification. So these demonstrations, plus the facilitating information sharing and development of robust measurement, will help facilitate responsible deployment and will help scientists and engineers drive down costs of carbon dioxide removal projects. So thanks so much for your time and for allowing me to share a sampling of these recent international collaboration efforts. I'm going to turn it over now to Mark Kevich. Mark, over to you.
Great, thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for joining. And I'm Mark Kevich. I'm the director for the Office of Carbon Management Technologies, and it's my pleasure to moderate our fireside chat. And I'd like to welcome our 2 participants, Dr. Raghuveer Gupta from Sustyon Technologies and Mr. John Northington, the director for the National Carbon Capture Center. Before we jump into the chat, I want to start with some brief introductions. And Raghuveer, we'll start off with you. If you can maybe provide an introduction to yourself, your role, and telling us about Sustyon more broadly.
Thank you very much, Mark, for inviting me to this event. My name is Raghuveer Gupta. I'm a big fan of the Carbon Management Day. As a scientist, all our life revolves around carbon, and having spent last 30 plus years into the CO2 R&D space. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and after getting my training, after my PhD training, I joined Research Triangle Institute in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, and led the energy technology division there. During my time at RTI, I was very fortunate to participate or lead over $300 million worth of fossil energy DOE-funded R&D projects, which included coal gasification, syngas processing, CO2 capture, hydrogen production, etc. One of the key projects which I was responsible for was a 50 megawatt demonstration unit, which was funded under the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act at Tampa Electric. Spoke power plant in Florida, where we designed, built, and operated a 1,000 ton per day CO2 capture plant. So in 2018, I decided to venture out on my own from RTI and started Sustyon. And our focus in Sustyon is it is a technology incubator solely centered around decarbonization. we develop and deploy carbon removal and carbon capture technologies. So a lot of experience. I have a lot of experience from taking the technologies from lab scale to pilot scale and eventually the commercial scales. So again, thank you for inviting, and looking forward to participating in this panel discussion.
Great, thank you, Raghuber, and we'll turn it over to John.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, my name is John Northington. I serve as director of the National Carbon Capture Center, and also as director of Net Zero Technologies for Southern Company R&D. And I've been with Southern Company for about 16 years now. And as a company, we have an industry-leading R&D organization, and have been focused on identifying technology solutions for the future for over 50 years now. My direct responsibility is focused in on carbon capture, carbon utilization, and carbon storage research and development. And so as a part of that, I have responsibility for our work at the National Carbon Capture Center in cooperation with the Department of Energy through the Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Group managed out of NETL, National Energy Technology Laboratory. And so it's been really exciting and interesting to see the progression of the technologies over time. We've been in this space for and working on carbon capture development for over a decade now. And so really excited to be a part of the chat today and looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Raghuber and John. And we're going to dive into a few questions here to probe a little deeper. So Raghuber, Succion received funding from FECM last year to help reduce the cost of capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So in layman's terms, can you talk more about this project and how it will help advance the deployment and commercialization of carbon management technologies?
Yeah, okay, great. So at Succion, we focus on three key areas: carbon capture and removal, CO2 utilization, and also production of carbon-free hydrogen, which are all in the FECM domain. So and typically, we partner with academic institutions and national laboratories to identify disruptive ideas and develop them with DOE funding, so we can mitigate major technology risks. So in this direct air capture technology area, which Mark mentioned, we worked with Columbia University, who was our academic partner back in 2019, and started with a small seed funding through Small Business Innovation Research Grant and a DAC FOA 2402 in 2020. So what this seed funding allowed us to do is get critical data on this concept, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And so our key focus in the DAC was how do we reduce the cost, how do we scale it up, and how do we make the technology reliable? These were the three critical factors which we wanted to address early on during the R&D step. So later on, we don't run into issues that we can't manufacture these materials, or the materials of construction don't exist for these type of systems. So with that idea, we basically decided that we need to start looking at the materials which are cheap. We need to look at the process designs which can be scaled up, and also, we can make these reliable. So get to a cost target, long-term cost target, about $100 a ton. As we all know, that 400 ppm CO2 in air is a very dilute stream. And as a chemical engineer, I can tell you this is an expensive separation. But if you do some thermodynamic assessment, the free energy for this separation is only about 140 kilowatt hours per ton of CO2, where most of the DAC processes are operating somewhere between 3,000 and 8,000 kilowatt hours of CO2. And why is that? Because we have to move large amount of air, and also we have to heat the entire reactor for desorption. We lose a lot of heat. So this provides us an opportunity for innovation in minimizing these heat losses. So what we did is in getting these through the seed funding from DOE, we were able to address some of these challenges in the lab, which allowed us to get $10 million venture funding from Breakthrough Energy Ventures and Grantham Foundation last year to really develop this technology to the next level. And now we are focused on basically taking this technology to a pilot plant next year to about 1 ton per day scale. That will pave the way for us to participate in DAC hubs and DAC prize, as you guys just outlined in this thing. But we are very excited about it. But the key thing is without the seed investment from FECM, we would not have been here, and really that really allowed us to get there,
Thanks, Raghuber. And we're going to stay with you here. One follow-up question, and then we'll go to John. You talked about the $100 per ton cost target, and can you maybe speak to that a little bit more on how your project is anticipating to reduce that overall cost, and what impact that cost target has on the price reduction for CDR or direct air capture in general, and how do you expect it to impact the industry?
Absolutely. I think this is a critical question because, there's a lot of buzz in the market about the DAC and the cost. But if you really analyze the cost of the DAC technology, there are 3 major components. First and foremost is the energy you need for separation, either in terms of the thermal heat, you need steam for regeneration of sorbents, or you need electricity in case of electrochemical or membrane processes. And the third is operational and maintenance cost for the unit. So if you start analyzing all 3 numbers and see where the possibilities of getting to the cost reduction, number 1 cost is the energy. And energy is probably, I said, right now the numbers which are quoted are somewhere between 3,000 and 8,000 kilowatt hours per ton of CO2. So one of the things which we did in our process and from our analysis, what we found out that if you're going to use the thermal heat in terms of steam, which, for most of the amine sorbents you need, we're going to have a lot of losses, first in generating steam and then using the steam. And so we basically came up with the idea of directly heating the sorbent layer itself and not heating the whole reactor. So in that case, we can basically provide an electric current to a resistive material, which will locally heat the sorbent and dissolve the CO2 very quickly. So that's one thing, and we believe that if we can get to about 2,000 kilowatt hours per ton, and in a long-term renewable energy, electricity cost is about 3 cents. That brings to about $60 a ton of the CO2 capture cost, just the contribution from the energy. Then the second thing we did is we started looking at the materials which are cheap and abundantly available. So we decided that the alkali carbonate materials are reasonably cheap, and so the key thing is how do we activate those the alkali carbonate like sodium carbonate to get fast reaction rate. And we spent quite a bit of time in the lab to really figure out that we can use those materials very cheaply, and the device also as a standard structured reactor which is used in industry. So bringing all these components from different industries, we believe we have a viable technology roadmap to get to a $100 ton pathway in the future. So that's basically the number. And I think if we get the $100 per ton of the CO2 capture, I think we can start decarbonizing the industry, because then air capture plants don't need to be a point source site. Wherever you have a cheap renewable electricity or a CO2 sequestration site or a CO2 utilization need, you can put these plants. And so the hard to decarbonize sector like aviation, which will take time. And at least the DAC provides the pathway to really get to some net negative CO2 emissions, which will allow us to continue to operate some of those industries which are difficult to decarbonize.
Great, thanks, Raghuber. So John, the National Carbon Capture Center has been a key center for testing and innovation for over 10 years. Can you talk about the role the facility has played over this past decade in scaling up capture technologies and its impact on the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. The facility really does serve a critical step in bridging the gap between laboratory environment testing and technology development and the scale up to commercial technologies, or the technologies that are commercially deployable. And so we've been able to work in that space for well over a decade in partnership with the Department of Energy. That's the other thing that's really, I think, a value that the facility brings, is just that collaborative nature of technology development and project support that happens at the site. And through that time, over the past decade, we've tested now more than 70 different technologies, many of which have scaled up to additional testing. And we talk about hardening the technology at the scale that we're able to provide, from kind of that early laboratory up to kind of a small pilot scale slipstream at our facility. It really gives you a chance to develop the technology to a point where you understand and you have hardened concepts and approaches, where then you're ready to take that next step and confidently scale technology up. And so we've seen a lot of our technology developers be able to do that. Through that process, we've also reduced the cost of capture, projected cost, by about 40%, which is a tremendous advantage. We're excited about the future and looking at more transformational approaches as well. And so really, that, as we think about it, I think it's how do we help move these technologies forward and continue to identify transformational approaches that present the opportunity for significant cost reductions, improvements in efficiency, and end up with a variety of technology solutions in the future that are deployable across a range of different sectors of the economy.
Great, thanks, John. And you touched upon the future a little bit. Can you maybe talk about how the National Carbon Capture Center has changed over time, and what are some of those new opportunities that you're seeing at the facility?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've grown and changed quite a bit over a 10-year period, as you can imagine. But a lot of our work historically was focused more strictly on point source carbon capture technology development across a range of different technology options and approaches. And that has begun to shift as our scope has expanded. In the fall of 2020, so kind of in the midst of the pandemic, we expanded our scope to not only include carbon capture technologies focused on point source approaches, but also direct air capture technology testing at the site, and carbon conversion technologies there at the site as well. And so leveraging the infrastructure that is on the ground to be able to support now a range of testing. I also mentioned that the facility has changed. It's changed in the fact that we have for a long time had a coal-fired flue gas source for point source capture. We've now expanded that to include a natural gas-fired system to provide natural gas-based power generation conditions that you would see at natural gas combined cycle facility, for instance. And so it's broadened the ability of the facility to test across a range of different flue gas source concentrations for our technology developers. And so looking for ways to continue to, as we partner with DOE, to improve the capability of the site, to make it as flexible as possible, but really excited about the new additions to our work scope with the focus on direct air capture technology, testing and carbon conversion, utilizing, again, the infrastructure that we have on the ground, but also utilizing our staff to help support these technologies as they progress.
Thanks, John. And I'm going to pose a question to both of you. And you kind of touched on this maybe a little bit, but if you can expand on it a little bit further. And Raghaber, in your case, your projects at Sustion, and John, in the case of the National Carbon Capture Center, what role do you see your company and these facilities helping play in achieving the nation's goals of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050? And Raghaber, we'll start with you first.
Okay, so I think the key thing, we've been, and I've been associated with the carbon capture program at FECM and NETL since 1998. And I think a lot of really good laboratory and bench scale research was done in first 20 years. But I think the last couple of years, I think the whole landscape has shifted. There is much more acceptance in the society, as well as capital markets have basically spoken that they want to see net zero carbon world. I think with those impetus and the major pieces of legislation, as Brad said, on bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and increased funding through annual appropriations. I think some of those ideas which were developed over the last 10 years or so, now they are seeing more industrial appeal. So they are basically going to pilot level and demonstration level. And I think the key role which we see is how do we really screen those ideas to make sure that they are ready to be scaled up, try to reduce the scale up risk as much as possible through the experience, engineering experience and scale up experience, and really use the public and private sector partnerships to show that these technologies can provide cost-effective solutions. So I think it's working on both ends. I think there is a market created for carbon emissions through the 45Q, both on the direct air capture as well as point and industrial sources. And also the innovation on the technology side, which now can be tested at a scaled up level, that what John said, that, for example, at NCCC. So in Sustion, what we see our role is how do we really work on translating some of those disruptive ideas into processes and designs which have a minimal risk at scale up, because the scale up for these technologies is quite expensive. It takes a long time. So you want to really resolve a lot of uncertainties and risks at early stage at TRL 4, 5, maybe 6, no more than that, because otherwise those projects will fail if we don't address those risks early on. And I think at Sustion, our focus is how do we really retire as many risks as we can on the technology side, so the scale up becomes successful.
Yeah, and
Go ahead, John.
I'll add to that. I think that Dr. Gupta is right. As you think about reaching a net zero future, I think we all acknowledge that that's going to require technology solutions, some of which that may not exist today. And so as a facility focused on carbon capture, utilization, testing and development, I think we've been able to kind of have a direct impact in helping move technology forward, accelerate the technology development through the partnership that we have there at the facility. And that's critically important to keep that pipeline of technology solutions full. We're kind of helping to provide the role in bridging that gap to the real world at the facility, which is critically important, so that, as Dr. Gupta was saying, you de-risk the technology, you harden the technology, you understand what's possible, and then you can confidently start to scale the technology up. And so again, we're super excited to be able to provide that opportunity. And again, we've seen technology developers, many of which have moved on to front-end engineering design studies and have scaled the technology up to larger scale tests after our facility test that are now to the point of being able to move forward with commercial or large scale demonstrations. And so we see that process continuing. We're focusing on more transformational approaches as we kind of look at our scope of work over the next few years, and that's exciting that we'll have an opportunity to help move some of those out into the larger scale space and move those technologies towards commercialization.
Great, thanks, Raghaber and John. And we'll go with one more question, and then get to some of the questions in the Q&A, not just for our fireside chat, but for all our panelists. But one final question for both of you. You both alluded to a lot of your experience working in the carbon management space for quite some time. What advice would you give to someone who is just getting into the carbon management field?
Okay, I'll start with that. And I tell you what, and I work with a lot of, we work with a lot of universities, and I get to meet of students, and that is really the fun part of my job, and try to really talk to them about what is carbon management and why should they be excited. But I believe, and I think it is the greatest challenge of our lifetime, and as we know we can never stop emitting carbon. The hydrocarbons will be around. Yes, we will reduce them, but we will not be able to live without the capture and the removal part. And multi-dimensional problem. It's not only the scientists and the engineers, but we need craft labor, we need geologists, that this problem has to be solved, in a holistic manner with a lot of people working together. And so we believe that this could be a bigger opportunity than what we saw the revolution in 2000 for the semiconductor and information technology and biotechnology. I think this particular space could be much bigger and much more, economically beneficial to the society to really create completely new types of jobs, new types of, businesses, and this is just emerging. And the most heartening thing is the investment commitment from major organizations, the venture industry, the philanthropic industry, and a fairly large investment from the governments. And so I think this is really a perfect storm in our view. And I think the young generation should be very excited about it because they can pursue their passions and really help solve this problem.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think that it's a tremendous opportunity from a standpoint of placing value on the public-private partnerships, and you think about the work that we're doing to develop these technologies is hard, and it's expensive and it's difficult. And so as we think about that, doing it in a collaborative way brings tremendous value. I've been fortunate enough to see that firsthand at the National Carbon Capture Center. And the other thing that I would say is just the encouragement of we need visionary innovation. We need things that create disruption from a technology standpoint and a suite of technology options. And so just kind of encouraging the continued pursuit of that, along with the opportunities that we have. I think, as were highlighted earlier, some of the greatest opportunities I think of for many of us of our career to see the technology move forward in a very strong way. And so that's exciting.
Great. Thank you, John, and thank you, Raghaber. Again, thank you for participating in our fireside chat. We're going to ask you to stick around because there's going to be we're going to move into a Q&A portion here, and I'm just going to ask our other panelists who spoke earlier today that there are some various questions coming into the chat. So please keep using the Q&A to our audience. but we are going to go into some of those questions. And the first question that I want to hit, and I'm going to ask Dr. Jen Wilcox to respond, is there's a question on, are there any initiatives related to converting existing fossil fuel infrastructure to carbon capture or clean energy projects? And the question is trying to understand what are some of the needs, how can we proactively manage this transition, and is there a plan to repurpose this infrastructure and retrain workers?
Thanks for that question, Mark. There is a lot of activity in this space, and even within FECM, we have a program called Energy Asset Transformations, just recognizing that there's a gap. But when you look at a lot of the energy assets that are out there, it's there's a lot of projects and ways that we can explore. Some of the activities that you see today are some of the retiring units are being converted to nuclear, for instance. But you can also envision other approaches like conversion, for instance, to hydrogen production. One of the things that's a benefit of some of these assets is that they may be along rail lines, they may have connectivity to the grid, you may have access to water. And so there's a lot of assets that aren't just associated with capital, but other kind of assets that can be leveraged for clean energy technologies and pathways. And so this is something that we're really excited about. And there's a lot of opportunities, not just in FECM, but really more broadly too across DOE.
Thanks, Jen. Brad, we'll maybe ask you the next question, and it's related to the IRA, and is the $180 per ton CO2 for direct air capture for capture only, or for capture plus the other elements like storage?
That's a great question. This is often misunderstood. That technically speaking, the 45Q tax credit is not a tax credit for capture. It's for the storage or the conversion of captured carbon emissions. In fact, you can only claim the tax credit after demonstrating that you've captured, in some cases transported, but ultimately permanently geologically stored the CO2, after which you can claim the tax credit, or you've converted those captured carbon emissions into some sort of useful product. So it's a performance-based tax credit. So to answer the question, if you have a direct air capture project, you have to obviously capture and separate the CO2 from ambient air. And then you either have to geologically store it or convert it to some product that would ideally have permanence to it, and that the CO2 would not later be re-released. And then you have to demonstrate to the Internal Revenue Service that you've accomplished that, and then you're able to, in the case of a direct air capture project, claim the $180 per ton. But just capturing it alone doesn't qualify you for the tax credit.
Great, thanks, Brad.
Mm-hmm.
So Raghavir, there's a question that had come in for you, and it's related to green hydrogen and whether that's a good alternative for decarbonizing heavy and transport industry. And if so, what are some of the current barriers to make that transition a reality?
Okay, on the green hydrogen, I think when we talk about the green hydrogen, we typically talk about the electrolysis. And I think, so you basically decompose water to make hydrogen and oxygen, and then hydrogen is used. So one of the biggest challenge, whether in green hydrogen production or even the direct air capture, is the availability of the renewable energy. And if you take just, I'll give you an example, 1 gigaton of direct air capture CO2 you want to capture, you need roughly 2,000 terawatt hours of renewable electricity. That's not we don't have that in US today. So the thing is the all green hydrogen projects will depend on the availability of the electricity and cheap electricity. So the question then becomes is the green premium, which Bill Gates calls in his book, that when you produce the steel or other industrial commodity using hydrogen rather than using the conventional methane and other things, how can they be cost competitive with the current products? And I think that's the key question. We all, there are projections in the industry that the green hydrogen will be $1 a kilogram. DOE has the hydrogen shot program. But this will only happen when we have a fairly large infrastructure for 24/7 green electricity. And once that infrastructure is available and electricity becomes 1 or 2 cents a kilowatt hour, answer is absolutely yes, we could do that. But that will take some time.
Great, thanks, Raghavir. And the next question, maybe for Jen or Brad. There's a lot of excitement in the Inflation Reduction Act, but a potential challenge is permitting. And the question is DOE doing any work in coordinating with states on this topic?
Maybe, Jen, how about I start at a general level, and then you can add, since you've been involved directly in some of the interagency work.
Perfect.
So we're very active in engaging with the Environmental Protection Agency, but also the Department of Interior and the Forest Service and other federal agencies that have a role to play in permitting, essentially mostly geologic storage projects, but ultimately the whole value chain where permitting is necessary. We're also, and I'll let Jen talk about this, but we have a lot of engagement with EPA in particular, supporting EPA to scale up implementation of regulating what's called the Class 6 program, which is underground injection permits for dedicated geologic storage. We also help the Council on Environmental Quality and the White House staff and coordinate a interagency working group. And we will be working with Council on Environmental Quality also to implement the permitting task forces that have been identified in the USID Act, which was passed as part of the 2020 Energy Act, which will facilitate improvements to permitting at the state and regional and federal level for all types of carbon management projects. So Jen, maybe you can fill in some of the detail on the work that's going on.
Yeah, so we've been working really closely with our colleagues at EPA, in particular the groundwater protection group, the water group, and we're also working closely with the regional administrators. And so just recognizing that when we look at sequestration projects, that there are communities. And so a lot of the work is associated with engagement, working with the regional administrators to be really clear about what the technology is, that we have the tools that we've actually invested in over 2 decades at the Department of Energy, and the tools to be able to monitor CO2 in the subsurface. We understand how it migrates. We understand the different mechanisms of storage over the course of a project, and we have the tools to be able to get ahead of any of the challenges. And so that piece is just really important. And I've had the opportunity to really work with our colleagues at EPA in a regional way to try and do that outreach and do that education. And I think it's going well, and excited about the work.
Thanks, Jen. So the next question, and John Northington, this is maybe for you. When are we going to put CCS on gas plants? What's that time frame look like for CCS deployment on natural gas?
Yeah, well, I think you have already seen several feed studies that have been produced where we've looked at just that, CCS added to a natural gas combined cycle plant. I think with the opportunities that are currently available through bill funding, and as we've been talking about with the 45Q tax credits, I think there is a tremendous opportunity coming up in the next 5 to 10 year period where there will be the opportunity for those technologies, for carbon capture technology to be deployed at sites, at a natural gas combined cycle site, but others as well across industrial sectors, as we've kind of been talking about the opportunities there. So yeah, no, I think that a lot of the due diligence and the work that has been done for a long period of time now to prepare those technologies as we were talking about, confidently scale them up, de-risk the technologies, understand how to integrate through the feed studies. So I think a lot of the groundwork has been laid, and just excited to kind of see how things move forward in the next 5-year period, especially as we start looking towards the future and deployment of the technology.
Great, thanks, John. And we had we'll turn our next question to Matt. There were some questions related to international and specifically about the location for the Africa Center of Excellence. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit? And then just a little more broadly on FECM's engagement on moving and cooperating internationally and moving our technologies forward.
Yeah, sure. So the Africa Center of Excellence is actually located in Nigeria. So that's the physical location of the center, or will be located there. It's actually it's a resource for the entire continent. So while the physical location is there in Nigeria, or will be there in Nigeria, all countries across the continent, will have access to the resources and capabilities there. And to the second part of your question, kind of more broadly of how FECM engages, in expanding the technologies and markets that are here in the U.S. and working with other countries. So there's multiple ways that we do this. So it broadly takes the form of creating an enabling environment for, in this case, the carbon management industry. And what does enabling environment mean? It can come in multiple forms. So one is, from a technical standpoint, providing technical assistance. So that could be, for example, commissioning design or feasibility type of studies, or providing the expertise to characterize the local geology regarding suitability for secure CO2 storage, for example. Another aspect is from a policy standpoint, so sharing best practices about which legal or regulatory frameworks work and are successful. I would say a third is helping make connections. So when DOE works with other governments, that can facilitate connections between U.S. companies and the appropriate counterparts in other countries. And it can raise awareness of U.S. companies and technologies that may be well suited for application in that region. And so collectively, this all provides fertile ground for the private sector to engage and ultimately decide whether or to what extent to invest their time and their capital in other countries.
Great, thanks, Matt. We have two questions that we're going to have for Brad. So Brad, the first question is, what is the Department of Energy's plans to address concerns that carbon dioxide pipelines are unsafe? And how does the agency respond to opponents of CO2 pipelines who referenced the rupture in Satartia, Mississippi in 2020?
Okay, thanks, Mark. Well, let me start by taking one step back and sharing with the audience that we have had large-scale transport of CO2 by pipeline in the United States for 50 years. And for the bulk of that time, we've had thousands of miles of CO2 pipelines transmitting tens of millions of tons of CO2 annually without incident. In fact, over that entire 50-year period, there has not been one human fatality. And so I think it's just important to understand that context. So if you think about the types of large-scale infrastructure that we depend on in our modern lives, for example, electric transmission and distribution infrastructure, pipelines transporting oil or natural gas, this infrastructure has been vastly safer because CO2 is inert, and we have a lot of experience transporting CO2. That's not to say the other things are inherently unsafe. There's just lower risk. That said, Satartia was a major accident that we are learning from and should never happen again. The challenges relate more to inadequate response emergency response. The company operating the pipeline had not adequately informed local officials and emergency response personnel about the CO2 pipeline and the nature of CO2 if it is released and how to respond to it. So local officials were unaware of what to do and didn't know, when they saw those conditions that people were experiencing, didn't know how to respond to it. There's no reason that should have happened. Two, what happened to the CO2 pipeline was the earth around the pipeline had started to erode, destabilizing the pipeline ruptured, which is something that can and should be addressed in how in the construction of the pipeline. So the federal pipeline FEMSA pipeline, Mark, help me out, the acronym Pipeline
Hazard and Safety
Materials and Safety Administration.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a mouthful. FEMSA has taken the initiative to respond to the Satarsha incident. They have a multi-point agenda that they're pursuing. At the heart of that is the updating of their safety requirements for CO2 pipelines, and that includes emergency response. They are also revisiting the engineering and safety requirements of pipelines and a whole range of other things associated with that. The one thing I would point out about pipeline ruptures, they are rare. In fact, the examples that's often used about a major CO2 pipeline rupture was actually a Norwegian company that is involved in testing the safety of equipment, and they purposely tried to make a CO2 pipeline rupture, pushed it to its extreme to underscore how safe it is. And I think some of that test data is being misused, because the actual record of operating this infrastructure is very encouraging. We just need to make sure that local governments and emergency response personnel and others are aware of how to handle any incidents that might occur.
So thanks, Brad. So we're actually gonna keep you here for two more questions, because a question came in that's somewhat related to the pipeline issues, and it's one of the key issues potentially delaying CCS and likely hydrogen projects are pipelines. So how is FECM working to address pipeline issues with other governments and with industry?
Well, so we're obviously engaged with FEMSA on updating their safety requirements and how they engage local officials and everything else. So that's obviously critically important, supporting their efforts. We are also involved with CEQ, the Council on Environmental Quality, which is, also examining the planning and permitting of pipelines. That will be also part of the Use It Act that I mentioned before in the permitting task forces. So we'll be taking another look at, are there additional roles the federal government can or should be playing in siting and regulating CO2 pipelines. Right now, it's principally a state responsibility for siting, but with federal safety requirements. But we will continue to look at that, because the key thing here is we know that we can operate this infrastructure safely. We've done so for decades. The Satarsha incident is a warning that we can't sort of sit back and not take this seriously. And I think that will guide what we do, because what we need to do to meet our climate goals is we need to scale up carbon management, and that means we'll need more of this infrastructure, not less. And so we need to make sure that we do it right. The other point I would make is that the safety question was raised, but there's also the question of minimizing the surface impacts and environmental impacts of siting all this infrastructure. So we're very involved, and policy requires us to, in the projects that we support, to look at using existing rights of way to avoid areas that have, where there might be environmental impacts, and also to engage with communities and others to make sure that there's support for this infrastructure. And so in terms of the projects that we support, we're going to be very involved in making sure that there's community input into that process.
Great, thanks, Brad. One more question for you, and then we'll go back to some of the others. But Does the Department of Energy think EPA needs to hire more personnel to effectively run its Class 6 permitting program?
Well, actually, I think that decision's already been made to the extent that Congress made a determination on a bipartisan basis in the infrastructure bill to expand the resources available to the EPA for implementing the Class 6 program. But it wasn't just EPA. They also, in that appropriation, are providing resources for states to beef up their capability to permit geologic storage projects. So EPA is in the process of expanding their capabilities and capacity at the headquarters level, but also at the regional offices where in the regions where these projects are occurring. So that whole process of utilizing those resources that were in last year's infrastructure bill is underway, but it's not yet complete.
Great, thanks.
And I would, one more thing, I would note that it was widely anticipated by the Department of Energy, EPA, this administration, and industry, and all kinds of other stakeholders, that there would be a need to expand permitting because the enhancements to the 45Q tax credit are significantly increasing the number of projects. There are now over 100 carbon management projects that have been publicly announced in this country, including many geologic storage projects. So the fact that the demand for permitting is increasing is not surprising anyone. That was something that we've been planning for.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks, Brad. The next question I'm going to turn to both John and Raghavir, and it's still related to permitting, but it's more about permitting as a driver for innovation and technology development. If you can maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll go first. Yeah, no, as you think about the deployment of technology, this is obviously a very, very critical piece to the process, and especially when you think about CCS and storage, making sure that you have a streamlined process to follow is very important in my view. I think that we've done a lot from a technology. I spoke about carbon capture earlier. We've also done a tremendous amount, and the Department of Energy has supported extensively work in the carbon storage space to really understand not only where the geology is good for carbon storage, but also to understand the implications of doing things in a regional way through the Carbon Safe program. And so the permitting will play a part in having a streamlined process to follow. Is, I think, going to be an important step to help with the speed of the deployment of the technologies. Dr. Gupta, I'll let you kind of respond as well.
So Mark, I'll speak very specifically for the direct air capture. So what has happened in last couple of years, this voluntary carbon market for CDR has evolved, and there's a huge amount of money. For example, Frontier, which was originally Stripe, raised a fund which is about $1 billion, $925 million, fund. Shopify, Microsoft, Amazon, all these big players have got into this business to basically doing CDR. And even today, the gold standard for CDR is DAC, carbon capture and sequestration. So everybody's so anxious about the permitting process. So to get any of these credits which are available in the voluntary market, you have to be able to demonstrate that you store the CO2. And even not at the 1 million tons per year, but even at like for example, take the Musk's X Prize award, which is a $50 million award for CDR or DAC. In 2025, it requires you to store 3,000 tons of CO2. So I think this has become a critical limiting factor on a lot of direct air capture technologies, having the permitting and understanding of the permit processes and what it will take. And one of the things with the DAC, which probably requires some DOE's attention, is all the sequestration specs for the CO2 are based on pipelines. I think if we put a CO2 capture or CO2 capture unit near the sequestration site, do we need to revise those CO2 purity standards for injecting it? And I think there's a lot of industrial, debate on that particular point. That why do we need to go down to certain things which pipelines dictate for the sequestration? So I think permitting is in a nutshell, permitting is a very critical issue for any of these technologies and any of those incentives which are available for these technology to proceed further.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Raghuber. We're going to take one final question, and it's for Jen. And is FECM still supporting carbon capture projects that use CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, or has it shifted focus to projects that don't lead to more fossil fuel extraction?
Thanks, Mark. At the end of the day, it's really important that we're focusing and prioritizing projects that maximize climate benefits. And so when you think about that, it's really about looking at projects that maximize getting CO2 underground. The other thing to think about, I think, with enhanced oil recovery is that the technology itself is commercial today, and we've been doing it since the late 70s. And there is an opportunity with the Inflation Reduction Act that's incentivizing through the federal tax credit to couple carbon capture with that commercially available technology. Within FECM, we're really about investing in more of the R&D and how can we enable a broader portfolio in our pipeline to ultimately lead to demonstration and net zero goals.
Great, thanks, Jen. So we're kind of butting up against our allotted time here, but I just want to thank all the panelists, our fireside chat participants, and also the audience for a lot of great questions. We obviously did not have a chance or an opportunity to get them all, but we really appreciate the interaction and the engagement from the audience as well. So thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Secretary Brad Crabtree for some closing remarks.
Great, thank you, Mark. And let me just start by thanking all of you for joining us. And so many of you, over 500 of you stayed at the very end. So we really appreciate that. I want to thank the members of the FECM team for their participation today, and for many others who were involved in putting this together, and of course our guests who joined us. I hope this session has highlighted what we really feel is an extraordinary opportunity now that we now have before us because of this robust framework of federal funding and incentives for carbon management, both the technology and the infrastructure, and also though the urgency of our deployment efforts that have to proceed to meet our climate obligations. So, as we think about this second Carbon Management Day, I think it's fair to say we've got a lot to celebrate, but there's also a lot to be done. I think it was Raghuber who said today that this is the greatest challenge of our time, decarbonizing our economy, but doing so in a way that safeguards the energy security of our country and our allies, that creates quality jobs, but that also measurably improves the economic and environmental circumstances of communities and regions across the country. So I look forward to our third annual Carbon Management Day in 2023, and hope a year from now we will be able to look back on the year to come and point to even greater examples of progress that we're making now on what is going forward an implementation agenda. So meanwhile, I hope you will all stay tuned. If you're not on the list, please reach out so that we can, with your email, so you can receive our periodic announcements that we make at FECM regarding our awards, investments that we're making, and milestones that we're achieving. So again, thanks everybody for joining us, and take care everybody, and we look forward to connecting in the future.